Good evening, and if you're just listening, you are listening to the Angel Rock live on UPRN, United Public Radio Network out in New Orleans, Louisiana. If you've never been to the show, sorry, I'm trying to get ahead of my words here with my mind. Welcome. I'm your host, Lorilei Potvin. As always, I have a great guest for you who I will introduce in just a few seconds. If you've never been to the show before, welcome. I say cover all aspects of the esoteric as well as the supernatural with the power of positive thinking, power of the mind, a little bit of truth seeking thrown in there, kind of a whole hodgepodge. And if you've been here before, welcome. And you will know we'll be looking for you in the chat. So if you are over on my Facebook page, I cannot see your comments. So please come over to our YouTube channel, which is under UFO Paranormal Radio. We are also streaming on UFO Extraterrestrials and Gods. We have 3 channels actually, but those 2 will be on tonight, and we're also on my YouTube channel. The other place I'll see your comments is on the UPRN Facebook page. You can find it under UPRN or UFO Paranormal Radio. A little bit about myself. As I said, my name's Lorilei Potvin. I'm a Canadian clairvoyant medium, crystal Reiki energy healer, Akashic Records practitioner, spiritual teacher, and mentor, and I'm also a registered nurse. And we want to thank our guests. We've had so many great guests from the UK. I have to give a huge shout out to a huge friend of the show, Gavin Lee Davies. He always sends me the best guests. And tonight is no different. Oh, I see you, Yvonne. Welcome. We've got Yvonne already saying hi, watching. So I'm going to read a little bit about her bio. Oh, I should warn you guys. I warned her ahead of time. My phone has a mind of its own. And today it was really bad. I have an Apple and it goes into something called the spinning wheel of death. And I could be mid-sentence and it'll look like I disappear. Our guest knows already. Hang in there. I've got my computer here. I'll be right back on StreamYard if it happens. Now, give me one sec. Like I said, I have my computer here. The guest that we are having tonight is Delphi Ellis, and I want to read her bio. I have to scroll down though, so give me a sec. You know what? Actually, I can't find it. We're just going to do it from the heart here. She's an author. She is a counselor. She also has worked, and this is something very near and dear to my heart, having worked in palliative care, and I feel very passionate about this topic, grieving and working with those who are left behind, especially those that have suffered a tragic loss, such as somebody that's been the victim of murder or suicide. The book that she has tonight, hang on, I have it. I've got it in small and no glasses. Answers in the Dark. Grief, Sleep, and How Dreams Can Help You Heal. Another topic right up my alley. Welcome, Delphi. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Lorilei. It's so good to be here.
What did I miss from your bio? Because I had everything all organized here. What did I miss? Did I miss anything?
Nothing. You hit that.
Excuse me.
It was that was really lovely. Thank you very much.
I forgot to mention though, because Gavin put it in your bio, that you've been on quite a few TV shows as well as radio shows talking about this phenomena, about what they reveal and can help us heal, right?
Yes. So it's quite an interesting topic over here. We don't really tend to talk about things that make us in the UK, but dreams is something that fascinates people. So yeah, it's allowed me to be on TV and radio talking about that.
Well, I guess as I always do this, I'm going to ask you, well, how did you get into this work? Because, I think you have to be a very special type of person to be working with people that are grieving, and especially when somebody has suffered a really tragic, unexpected loss like suicide, or I guess I should be careful because we're on YouTube. I just remembered, we'll just say taking one's life, and being murdered, because those are so unexpected, they're tragic, and there's so many more feelings that go along with that grieving. So what got you into this kind of work?
Yeah, so I mean, my therapeutic work started about 20 years ago, and it didn't happen by design. It just happened that most of the people that I started working with in the early days had been bereaved that way. And it was, I learned very quickly with that work that when the time was right, people wanted to talk to me about their experiences. And what was so interesting about that is in the early days, I realized quite quickly that people wanted to talk to me about their dreams and the way that they showed
Mhm.
up after those significant life events that you just described.
Mhm.
And the other thing that people wanted to talk to me, as I call it, is they wanted to get their sparkle back. They wanted to find a way to just get their mojo, get their
Mhm.
sparkle back after such a difficult time in their lives. And so it was really just as part of that work, it developed over the course of 20 years where people were talking to me about these life-changing experiences, and then they wanted to be able to find their way forward from there. So yeah, that's how I came into it. But my work with dreams started way before that.
Okay.
I grew up in a household where we would talk about our dreams around the breakfast table. So it was quite natural for me to be
Mhm.
able to, kind of bring that into my work because it
Mhm.
felt almost like second nature to me.
It's so interesting because my parents are still alive, and my abilities come more from my father's side than my mother's. And my mother is one to make fun of the things that I actually do because
Mm,
she's never taken the time to look into it. So, somebody with that kind of background where that's more natural for you, I find that it's just like a fish jumping back into water kind of thing. It just feels right, doesn't it, when you're talking about these topics that have been around you your whole life?
definitely. And I would say both of my parents were quite intuitive.
Hmm.
My dad particularly was a very warm and intuitive person. What was kind of the springboard for my work though was that my dad passed when I
I'm
was a
sorry.
teenager.
I'm
So
sorry.
yeah, so it was, I think really I talk about this in Answers in the Dark, that really that was the beginning. That was if you like the trajectory that just
Hmm.
changed my whole life. I think if my dad hadn't have died when I was young, then who
Hmm.
knows? Who knows what my career path might have looked like. But I still think it would have been evolved around helping people in some way and around dreams particularly, just because of that environment, like you said. And it was quite normal for me. I would come home and my mum would be doing the tarot, or
Oh, okay.
we
Hmm.
had we had a statue of Aphrodite in our front room.
Hmm.
We had a black cat. All the kind of traditional things that you would associate with that way of life. But I have to say again, that's quite unique. Well, it was when I went to school. I remember going into the playground one day, quite excited to talk about a dream that I'd had the night before, and my friends looking at me like, "What are you talking about?"
Oh,
So
really?
it was quite unique. It was quite a unique environment. But yeah, you're right. It was to have that level of understanding, where we talk about our dreams over the breakfast table. It
Hmm.
was unique, but it was special.
I have to agree with you. And even though I didn't grow up that way, and many people that have watched the show, I want to give a shout out to Debbie Grassberger Schmoley. She's here. She says, "Hi, Laura. We've got Delphi Ellis on tonight." Debbie, thanks for joining us, and everybody else that's watching. If you tuned in late, please either tune into our YouTube channel, UFO Paranormal Radio Network, or we've got UFO Gods and Extraterrestrials, or you can go to the Facebook page with under UPRN and you'll find us. I'll see your comments there. Otherwise, I can't see them if you put them anywhere else. So, and I like to always make you people part of the conversation. But how we came into our experience was through an extreme paranormal experience. Like, I'm actually writing a book. We shared it on TV, but I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing had that not happened.
Mm,
But I'm actually writing 3 books, and my third one, because I work quite extensively in palliative care and end of life care, as well as at the beginning of life in the NICU, but it was the end of life. And I'm collecting stories right now, mostly from nurses, but from first responders, the incredible, miraculous things that we experience as healthcare providers at the end of life. But
mm,
with dreams, where dreams really come up in my work now. And I find with being a medium, and grief is a normal process, there's no timetable. I know I'm not telling you anything new, but for people listening, because if you've never experienced it, people will just think, time has passed. Like, what's wrong with you? You should be
mhm,
getting on with your life. Like, you should be over this, when they have no idea. It's so personal, and it's an experience individual to each individual that experiences it.
mm,
But because with the grief, it lowers our vibrational energy. Right. And I know you know this, but for our listeners and viewers, so what happens is it makes it more difficult for our loved ones to connect with us from the other side. But one of the easier ways for them to do this is through our dreams.
Mm.
So I always counsel people when they would, I'm not a counselor, but when they'll come for a reading and, wants a message from their loved ones, and then we start talking about the dreams that they've been having, then
Mm.
we find out that the loved one has been visiting many times. So I always encourage people, keep a book at your bedside with a pen and paper, because by the time your feet hit the ground and say you're running to the bathroom or brushing your teeth, 90% of the dream is gone. Probably
Yeah.
not for you though, because you've been recounting them, right, since you can remember.
Yeah, but it's so true. And I mean, I am a huge advocate of keeping a dream diary. I
Hmm.
think they are so powerful.
So many messages.
I
Hmm.
know, and I was talking to someone the other day that I looked back at one of my dream diaries from
Hmm.
about 20 years ago.
Wow.
It was so interesting to see what was going on as I was sort of emerging into this career, as I was emerging into this particular path. And it was so interesting to see what dreams I was having at the time, and how I was navigating life at that time. But you're so right as well around visitation dreams. When a
Mhm.
deceased loved one comes to us, one of the things I talk about in Answers in the Dark is how I differentiate those visitation dreams. So, for example, where a person is has these wonderful experiences, what I would call an authentic visitation dream is where a person appears to that person in a dream and they are well and they are happy, and often they'll say, oh, they were wearing an outfit, it looked like it was 20-30 years ago, or they just look really
Yeah.
well or really healthy. And for me, that is the classic visitation dream. And you're
Mhm.
right, one of the things that I also talk about is the fact that I think it's so important that we don't westernize our dream experiences. We fall into this trap of talking about, and don't get me wrong, over the years, over the last 100 years, there have been some really influential characters in conversations around dreams. I'm thinking of
Mhm.
Jung and Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, very
Yes.
influential. But we mustn't forget that we've been talking about dreams for thousands of years.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think what we fall into the trap sometimes of doing is westernizing this whole
Or
process.
complicating, right? Like all this symbology. And when you really look at the language of the subconscious,
Yeah.
it's not that difficult. It literally is quite literal. I find, at least when we
Yeah.
look at it. Hmm.
And I talk about this in Answers in the Dark, about I believe that the best person to decide what their dream means is the dreamer. They have
Yes.
they have the skills, they have the tools. It might take a little bit of investigation, it might be a bit of exploration, it might be that they reach out to a friend or a counselor or someone like that to kind of prod the memory a little bit. But certainly in terms of understanding their dream, the best person to decide what it
I
means is
agree.
the dreamer, is the person who had it. But one of the things I talk about in Answers in the Dark as well is how dreams are also a form of nighttime therapy. So I'm thinking about in the dreams that we were talking about earlier, after the experiences, those life-changing experiences where a person's been bereaved by homicide, for example, the types of dreams that a person experiences at that point, where, say, for example, their loved one comes to them, that may well be a form of nighttime therapy. That's when those big questions are being asked, the kind of things that they wish they'd said to someone, the kind of conversations they wish they'd had when that person was alive. That's what I call the nighttime therapy. So I think it's important as well that we expand our definitions and our distinctions to allow for people to process them in such a way that they feel that their dreams are giving them wisdom and knowledge, but in different ways. So if it's a visitation dream, people will say to me, and I've spoken to so many people over the last 20 years where they've said when they had a visitation dream, they knew it was a visitation dream because when they woke up in the morning, they felt like something really magical had just happened, really special. Whereas when it was nighttime therapy, sometimes in the mornings they'd wake up feeling like I need to do that again, or, I need to work
Hmm.
through that. I need to put that in my diary and so on. So that's where I think that's the wonder of dreams. They provide so much if we're just ready to listen.
So, okay, so I've met so many people that will say, I don't dream, I don't remember my dreams. Or I run into people that say there's a group, you're in a master class or something, and we're talking about dreams, and everybody's sharing these incredible dreams that they know they were true, verified dreams from their loved one. And then you always get people, there's a few that are just crushed because they don't feel like their loved one has visited them. They don't remember. Do you cover that in your book as well, Delphi?
Yeah, so I talk about the fact that there are so many different reasons why we don't remember our dreams. And one of them in particular is the fact that, if you said, if you don't write it down within the first few minutes of waking, it will just
Yes.
disappear into the ether unless something happens later in the day. But also, I mean, there's been some references, people who meditate are more likely to remember their dreams than those who don't. People who smoke are less likely to remember their dreams than those who don't smoke. It's fascinating. And I think this is why, certainly, and you talked about, when we're in those early raw days of grief, I think our minds are so busy with everything that's happening that we may not dream about our loved ones. And some people will say to me that they, to this day, have not had a dream about that loved one.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that I kind of reassure them to say is that might just be because there's nothing left to say. It might be that they're okay where they are, you're okay where you are. It
Or
might
they're
be,
able to check in. They're able to check in, like that, because when some people are in the throes of that deep, deep grief, their loved ones leave signs around, but
you
you're
can
just
see it.
trying to get by minute, never mind noticing what's around you. And then I also say to them too that if you feel you really need to talk to your loved one, and I don't say this is a magical guarantee, but open your mind before you go to sleep. Put it out there. You don't have to say it out loud, mom or dad or my brother, whoever it may be. I would love to just see you in my dream tonight. Could we connect? And it may not happen that night, but be open to it. And I think it puts it into the subconscious as well to open it up. Just my thoughts, anyways.
Yeah, I agree. And I talk about that in the book. I talk about in Answers in the Dark. I say that there are ways that if you want to, you can kind
Mhm.
of influence your dream content. So one
Yes.
of the things I talk about in Answers in the Dark is this amazing phenomenon where people will wake up having heard their name. So it's almost as if there was someone in the room with them
Yep.
and they've heard their name being called out as if there is someone there. And one of the things I do in the book is I offer this activity where I say to people, if you really want to connect with that voice, if you really want to know who that person was or why they called your name in that way, then there are things that you could try if you wanted to, if you felt safe enough, if it felt like it was okay to do that. But I
Mhm.
think this is one of the reasons why I talk in Answers in the Dark. I say about the fact that we have the science, we know about the way to some extent that the brain works, we know to some extent that we sleep in stages, and the most common stage associated with dreaming is REM
Yeah.
sleep, but we know these kinds of things. What we don't know is why certain things happen the way that they do, is why people experience. So for example, I dreamt in cartoon once. I dreamt that I was in a small
Wow. Because somebody put in here they only dream in black and white. They don't
yeah,
dream in color.
it's all been common, and that's the thing where
Excuse me.
we know. But the thing is, if we were to put Boo Radley in a lab and say, right, we want you to have a dream right now, and we want you to remember it when you wake up in the morning, they either will or they won't. And that's the thing. It's the same with predictive dreams, dreams which come true. What we can't do is put someone in a lab and say, right, we want
Exactly.
you to have a dream that predicts the future. So one of the things I talk about in Answers in the Dark is I just think we need to keep an open mind. We need to remember that we haven't just been talking about dreams for the last 100 years. We've been talking about dreams for thousands of years. And if we can just open our mind, then we can maybe consider that there's more to it than just the subconscious rattling of your mind, that there may be more going on there. And that's why, for example, people throughout history have used their dreams creatively. So the author of the Twilight Saga, Stephanie Meyer,
I love that series.
dreamt that. She dreamt that from start to finish. She dreamt those books. Keith Richards, he dreamt the riff to I Can't Get No Satisfaction. You know, there's people throughout history that have used their dreams creatively. They've used them to influence their work, that they've used their wisdom. Robert Louis Stevenson dreamt Jekyll and Hyde. You know, there's people throughout history that have used their dreams creatively. You know, Stephanie Meyer, when she had that dream about Bella and Edward and the vampire and the wolves, she didn't wake up in the morning and think, oh, what's the symbolic reference of me dreaming about
No.
she knew she'd been given a book, you know, she knew she'd been given a book. So I think that's why, you know, sometimes, and like you were saying, I'm not going to say that you get any guaranteed results with all of this. I'm not going to say for a second that your viewers are going to dream a best-selling novel tonight,
Right.
but it's fair to say that we can use our dreams in ways, if we can just open up the possibilities, we can use our dreams in all sorts of ways that can be helpful.
I love it. I'm going to read a few of the comments here. I do try and highlight them. I know you're a pro because you saw them. You made note of them. So we have Yvonne Gladwell that was here at the beginning watching. And then Debbie Grassberger Schmoley, we gave a hello to. I want to go through a few of the comments here with Boo Radley because they're interesting. They say, so they said, I never dream in color. They said dreams have to be important because a few kinds of animals do it. Maybe all animals dream. We just haven't studied it all, right? Like they haven't got the verbal cues to be able to tell us. And then Boo Radley says, all of my dreams look like a cheap thrift store black and white TV. I know people who say they always dream in color. I always dream in color. I've never dreamed in black and white. And then they said their grandfather, sorry, my grandpa said he never dreamed, and they like your accent. And you're probably thinking, I don't have an accent. The host does. I go through this all the time. I have lots of friends over in the UK. We have that joke all the time. Then they said, no, I've never heard this before. A vegan diet makes, this person, sorry, I don't know if you're he or she, I'll say them. Vegan diet makes them dream longer and deeper. Diet has a lot to do with dreaming. Now, there's a few more comments, but I'd love to talk about this because there's quite a few different camps on this thought. What have you found with this?
Yeah, so I mean, it's fair to say that what we eat definitely can influence our dream content. I was on a TV show in the UK, which is quite a famous TV show called This Morning, and
I've seen it.
Yeah, the hosts, it was Holly Willoughby and Philip Schofield. And what they did, they knew that I was coming on TV. So the night before, they said, right, we're going to eat cheese. And I think Philip Schofield, I think he ate a really strong cheese, like a really strong blue moldy cheese. Like they do.
Okay.
Whereas Holly Willoughby, I think she just had like a really mild cheddar cheese. And the next day, the idea was they were going to see whether or not they remembered their dreams, whether it influenced their dream content. And he had a really vivid dream about our queen. And she didn't remember her dreams at all. And what's so interesting about that is that it's fair to say that food, particularly because of the ingredients of the food and the contents and the way it interacts and metabolizes in our body, it's fair to say things like chocolate, cheese, spicy foods, even some medication, you know, some of the over-the-counter herbal prescriptions for sleeping better have an ingredient in them called valerian.
I was just thinking of that word.
Valerian is what the ancient Egyptians used to do to influence their dream content, to help them remember their dreams. So all of these things we know they can have to a greater or lesser extent, but it's like everything, you either will or you won't. Some people will eat a strong cheese and they'll remember their dreams. Other people will eat a cheese and they don't. It's the same with, you know, if you watch a horror movie before you go to bed, you either will have a nightmare or you won't have a nightmare. You know, it's one of those things. It's kind of 50-50. But I think it is fair to say that what you eat can influence your dream content to some extent, and certainly medication. You know, medication can really have wild effects. Going back to what Boo Radley was saying about dreams in colour, I actually referenced this in the book as well, because in my experience, there's different reasons why people dream in black and white and why people dream in colour.
Oh, interesting.
So to give you an example, I've done throughout my lifetime, as I said, I've dreamt in cartoon, I've dreamt in black and white, and I've dreamt in colour. But when I've spoken to people, what's been so interesting about that is that to some extent, keeping their dream diary helped them understand why they had that dream in black and white, or why they had
I
that
like
dream
that.
if they did both. When they only tend to do one, it can be for all sorts of reasons. It might be, I mean, in the UK, I don't know what it's like in the US, but in the UK, we have a saying, which is that if a person thinks black and white, then it means that they're very direct, they're very straightforward, that they have a very particular way of looking at the world and dealing with the world.
Yeah.
So it might be a person who only dreams in black and white. That's almost like a reference to that. You know, it's a way of referencing how they experience the world and how they see the world. But for other people, one of the things I mention in the book, and this is why I said keeping a dream diary can be so helpful, when I've spoken to people who experience predictive dreaming, so dreams which later came true, they would say to me that they dreamt in black and white. So this is why it can be useful to keep your dream diary, because you might find that although the dreams don't necessarily come true straight away, or they might come true in a different way, so there's like a theme to it, then keeping a dream diary can help with that, because you'd be able to look back and say, oh yeah, I had that dream, I saw that that was going to happen, or you know, I experienced that dream in some way. So it's definitely worth keeping an open mind. As a person who was looking at it from a sort of a psychoanalytical point of view, from a symbolic point of view, they would say, you know, they would argue that perhaps you need more color in your life, or you perhaps need more intrigue, more, you know, more something, more excitement, you know, those kinds of things. But I look at it in a much broader perspective. It might be, as I say, it might be that there's some spiritual perspective to it. It might be that there's something else about the way that person approaches the world. It could be anything.
I really like the way you approach dreams, because it's been a long time. I haven't had the time, but if I do, I'll do one question readings. I'm in Canada, actually, but the owner of the network, Joe Montaldo, I'll give him a shout out. He used to produce my show. Now I do it on my own, but I'm still under his network. And he says that we're just the US's little brothers and sisters here in Canada. But I like what you said about dreams, because you know, when I will do a reading, like say every now and then I may have a bit of time and I'll just do whoever shows up, I'll do a quick one question reading. And you invariably will get people asking, and I'm sure you could answer this as well, repetitive dreams, or what does it mean? And, you know, it's the same reason why I tell people I don't predict the future, because and I usually use an analogy of always doing the same thing every morning, but you wake up late one morning and you do things completely differently. That's kind of how life is, right? So I'll tell somebody if something comes through, this is the way I'm getting it in this moment, but it may change.
Yeah.
Now with the predictive dreaming, and then I don't want to forget about the repetitive dreams, because I'm sure you've got stuff in your book about that. But I work with quite a few people that do have predictive dreams. I'm going to have to ask them if they've noted if they're black and white. And that's no challenge to you in any way, shape, or form. I find that very intriguing. Now my brain is working. I've never asked them, but they do get one person in particular I work very closely with. We're a trio, and we work with spirit, to what we call collectively spirit, or the other side, to sort of see if there's, you know, any information as to sort of what's been going on in the last 2 years. Is there anything we can do to help? Not that we think we're so big and wonderful and powerful, but it's coming from a positive perspective. And she has had predictive dreams, because she shares her dreams with us every morning. And some of the stuff has come true.
Yeah.
But getting back to repetitive dreams, so that's usually a question, or people want me to interpret it. And you know what, if you get into the psychoanalysis, exactly what you're saying, rather than the person that has the dream, you know, who knows you better than yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to I'll come back to the recurring dreams.
Okay.
But one of the things about the predictive dreams, one of the things I talk about in Answers in the Dark, is that there are actually different types of predictive dream as well. So there's what we call precognitive, which is where that's almost like your mind kind of going into the future and thinking, what's the likely event of this happening? So it's almost like your brain is working out on a almost like a strategic level that, yes, that's probably going to happen. And that's why you then have a dream which then comes true. There's also prophetic dreams, which are the types of dreams which most people recognize as the big events. You know, they'll say they dreamt about significant events in history, or so there's recorded incidents, for example, of people dreaming about the Titanic, you know, and things like that. And then there's also dreams which can tell you stuff about your own health and well-being. And of course, again, in some cultures around the world, not just in the West, but in some cultures around the world, they've been using their dreams to inform their health and wealth of the village. You know, they make decisions based on what their elders dream, and people that, you know, have those types of dreams. There were other things that people said to me. It wasn't just black and white. One of them, she told me, which was so interesting, whenever she had a dream which was predictive, in the dream, she'd look down and she'd be standing in a puddle of water. So
Interesting. Yeah.
it's not even necessarily the black and white thing. You know, for some people, it will be that, you know, they were something. And I will say, with the predictive element to it as well, when people spoke to me about it, when they said the black and white, they mentioned it more like the old-fashioned photographs, like that sepia tone. It was almost like that brown.
Do you think maybe because that would be a sign for themselves to know that, hey, pay attention, this is something that's coming up in the future? So this woman, like you said, if she would look down and see the puddle of water, and she would know that there has to be, maybe pay attention, there's something predictive in here maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, again, keeping a dream diary can be so helpful, because you may well find that you, over the course of time, it might be individual to that person. It might not be a puddle of water. It might be you've got a newspaper under your arm, or, you know, it could be anything for you. But certainly if you start to notice that, and that's where recurring dreams come into it.
Yes.
So one of the things that I talk about in Answers in the Dark is that usually recurring dreams contain a message, and once you've understood that message, they may well stop, unless they have a theme to it. So one of the most common dreams that people will have is that they dream they're back at school taking their exams. And people will find that they have this dream at certain points in their lifetime. But even when they understand it. So for a lot of people, this is a stress dream. It's an anxiety dream that's kind of pointing them towards, they might be going through a period of learning, but they might also be working to a deadline, or they might be working under pressure. So they're feeling as stressed now as they were when they were taking their exams at school. And so even though they know that, they will still have the dream, because that dream is saying to them, do you remember how stressed you were then? You're that stressed now. So they'll have that recurring dream. But other people, like I was saying, they will have a dream that's recurring, and then, as you said, once they understand it, it will stop. You know, once they get to the bottom of why they're having it, it will stop. But this is why the recurring element to it can be so helpful. You might find that you have, some people said to me that they have predictive dreams around the time of a full moon. People will say to me that they dream about a particular animal every time they see a certain person, or they dream about a certain place every time they think about a holiday. So, you know, it's those kinds of things where they can start to make connections. I provide a template in Answers in the Dark.
I love it.
People explore them, but certainly those kind of recurring dreams, depending on what shape they take, they will be pointing them towards some information, which once they understand, it might well stop the dream.
Yeah, because I have gotten some really complicated ones that people will tell me, and they'll say that, and you know, you ask those questions, well, is there something going on in your life when you have the dream, or, you know, how often? And you know, it seems to be these ones. There was one in particular, I remember, it was about the snake, and she didn't have a fear of snakes, and it was a certain place. And even as a child, now I've had paranormal experiences ever since I can remember, but I would have this recurring nightmare. I don't know where I was, and it was with my family, and it was so real. Like, I don't know if I was lucid dreaming or what I was doing, but I haven't had it in years, and there was no prediction to when I would have it. It would be so terrifying. In each dream, I'd get just a little bit further
Mm,
about because we were running and we were hiding from something. So you get that from people, right? Now you get into psychoanalysis, you've got too much on your plate, you're trying to hide from what's going on or whatever it may be, right?
mm.
So that's where I was going with this. So, do you talk about astral travel and lucid dreaming? I would imagine you would in the book as well.
Yeah, so I talk about lucid dreaming in Answers in the Dark because again, it's just the most amazing phenomenon. And
Mm-hmm.
there are people I actually reference in the book, a guy called Charlie Morley, who has written some incredible books on lucid dreaming because it's been something that has helped him in, really quite phenomenally.
Mm-hmm.
But lucid dreaming essentially is when a person becomes aware of the fact that they are dreaming in a dream. And I can see someone's put in the comments about flying dreams, and
Yes.
that's a great example of how we tend to become lucid. So what tends to happen in a lucid dream is a person will become aware of the fact that they are dreaming, and then because they've become aware that they are dreaming, they will wake up. So there will be something about the dream that gives them the impression this isn't quite right, and so they'll wake up. Or for some people,
Can
they will
control it.
control it. So they'll stay in the dream and they'll be
Mm-hmm.
able to control it. And flying dreams are a classic example of that. So one of the things that I talk about in Answers in the Dark is flying dreams. Again, culturally, they have different meanings depending on our circumstances and various other things. But what I found so interesting was that when I've spoken to people who've had the flying dream, if they've managed to stay lucid, so they've become aware of the fact they're flying, they've thought to
Mm-hmm.
themselves, "This I can't do this in real life,
Mm-hmm.
so I must be dreaming," and they have then been able to control their flight. And when I talk about flying in dreams, I'm talking about like Superman as opposed to being in.
My partner, my husband can do that. He
Yeah,
can control dreams. I
yeah,
would you be open to me sharing a dream with you because I'd be very interested in hearing what your thoughts were.
sure, yeah.
Okay. So it was back in our old home, and it was just before all the crazy paranormal activity happened. I had just taken my certified angel card reading course. I was really starting on this spirituality type journey many years ago, almost 2 decades ago. And there was a tree in my front yard, and I was outside in this dream. It happened about 16, 17 years ago. It's like it happened 10 minutes ago. There
Mm,
was a man sitting in my tree, and I can tell you what he was wearing. It was a dark charcoal colored pinstripe suit. He had on like a white crisp shirt, black tie, black goatee and mustache all in one. His
wow.
face was this sickly, pasty, greenish white, and his eyes were turning from black to flame. His hair was slicked all the way back. He knew my name and identified what type of entity he was.
Wow.
And it's not radio friendly what I told him where to go because he was trying to get me to agree to follow him. He would give me
Mhm,
wealth, he would give me fame, whatever.
mhm.
And then he started to mock me and laugh at me and told me his name, spelt it for me. I guess I can say what he told me. He was a demon. I'd
Mm.
never heard this name. I'd been raised Roman Catholic. And again, it's not radio friendly what I said to him in my dream. And he laughed at me and he shook his finger and he went, "Oh, no, 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 no. Every time you see a crow or a raven, you'll know who it is." And I remember in the dream, so I obviously controlled it because I called on Archangel Michael. There
Mhm.
was this brilliant flash of royal blue, silver, and white. And I woke up. I'm like this, crying, shaking, and in a sweat. But to add to the dream very quickly, 10 years later, what do I find on a page? The exact spelling I had been given, the exact name, the exact animal form, and all heck broke loose in my house after that dream. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Wow. I mean, that is just incredible, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
this is where it's so interesting. And I'm thinking about a story where when the Buddha attained enlightenment, um,
Okay.
just prior to the Buddha attaining enlightenment, he was visited by a demon
Mm-hmm.
and very much, as you said, was trying to tempt him with all
Mm-hmm.
of these kind of things. And the Buddha turned around, the demon's name was Mara, and the
Mm-hmm.
Buddha turned around to him and said, "I see you, Mara. I know what you're trying to do." And what that it just reminded me, you talking about that, it just reminded me of that story about how you had the presence of mind to know what was going on.
I had to be lucid dreaming because
Yeah.
he referred to something. I didn't want to make it too long, but I was with my first husband at the time, and I'd hurt my back as a nurse. I can never go back. But
Mm.
I was just commenting. We had just watched the movie The Secret, and when
Right.
it had come out, and I happened to be able to get up that day, and I'm always going to be doing something. So I was creating pet accessories. So everywhere I went to local shops, they all wanted to sell them for me. Nobody wanted a commission. I remember saying to my then husband that day,
Mm.
this is incredible. Like nobody wants a commission. I remember him saying facetiously, maybe it's the secret. And then I have that dream that night. And I'm getting goosebumps now telling you.
Yeah.
Because
Wow, that
that's
sounds.
why he was tempting me. He said, you know, those little craft things that you're doing, that is nothing. I can give you wealth. I can give you fame. I can give you everything beyond your wildest dreams. All you have to do is agree to follow me.
Mm.
And there was no way I was doing it in that dream.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think
Mhm,
that level of awareness, like you said, that is very much what lucid dreaming is
mhm,
like. It's that level of awareness of being in control and being able to say, yes, I am, or no, I'm not.
mhm,
And that again, that comes back to the flying dreams as well, you know, where people can fly
mhm.
through walls, they can, you know, they can control how fast they fly, you know, and all those kinds of things. So yeah, I mean that is an incredible experience, an example of lucid.
And then to find it 10 years later, like I purposely looked for this name
Yeah.
because I never heard it. And I just had somebody contact me. I don't know why strangers contact you and will ask you what the name was because you see on the TV show, like it's not, and I warn them, this is nothing to fool around with, right? And
Mhm.
whether you believe in this kind of stuff or not, everything's energy. And
Mm.
then so they start throwing out the usual names. It is such an unusual name. I'd never heard this name, and it's not that long. So to
Mm.
happen to find it while I was trying to help somebody 10 years later, and everything I've been told in that dream right there on paper.
Yeah, it's all
Mhm,
connected, you know, it's
mhm,
all connected. And this again, this is where dream diaries can be invaluable because you'd
mhm.
be able to go back and identify it. But what's also interesting about that is how vividly you remember that dream.
Yeah, like it was 10 minutes ago.
Today,
Mhm,
and it was there's a really lovely Greek philosopher who talked about that. He described the fact that we all have one great dream,
mhm.
and the idea that there will be one dream that a person will have. I remember mine. I remember
Do
I was
you?
a child when I had mine,
Yeah.
and it was a flying dream, incidentally. But it is that thing that you remember it your whole life. You know, that's never going to leave you, in the sense that,
Mhm,
you know, you'll always be able to remember it. But again, it's that whole thing about what did it mean to you? How did you process it at the time? But sometimes, and this is the thing with dreams, sometimes the answer isn't there straight away. And
mhm.
this is why dream diaries can be so helpful, because it might be 5 years, 10 years, like it
Yeah.
was in your case. It could be 10 years down the line where you see that name again and you think, okay, what's the significance of this? What's the representation of this? How
Mhm,
can I use this information in a way that's helpful to me? So
mhm,
I think that's, again, it's that whole thing about, you know, what you make of it, how you experienced it, how vivid, how real it was for you, but the awareness that you had in that dream to
mhm.
not go with him, you know, to stay where you were and to stay
Oh,
safe.
believe me, it's not radio friendly what I told him to do, and not once, but twice. And I remember I was angry. Like, how dare
Mm,
you come in
yeah,
my yard? How dare you be in my how dare you? That's all I kept thinking. How dare you?
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. It's
Hmm.
profound. It's really powerful stuff.
I just never thought to mention it to somebody. And I thought, we're talking about this. I thought, I have to hear. I really respect what you're saying, and I resonate with a lot of the things you're saying. Because when I'm working with people, like I said, that's my number one thing I almost always say to people: dream journal. I
Mm,
have paper all over here. I have to read, because you don't have to write a novel. I tell people, even just jot down points. And then if you can go back, like if you don't have the time, at least you've got something to work with, right?
yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that I would say about dreams like that, where you have, I mean, so for example, someone that was looking at your dream from a Jungian
Oh,
perspective,
yeah.
would say that is a representation of yourself. That is a
And I've
character,
heard that.
that kind of thing.
Mhm.
From my perspective, it's so useful to look at other cultures and traditions and how they would have approached that particular dream. So in other cultures, for example, they may well have turned around to you and said, keep an eye on that name, make sure that you're, keeping an eye out for that name in particular, so that
I
when you,
think intuitively I knew that. You know
yeah,
what? That was the big sign for me. I've studied near-death experiences professionally and personally for about 40 years. And when people come back and they try and explain what the love felt like, there aren't human words and the colors.
the colors.
That's what it was at the end. The colors, that doesn't do justice what I witnessed. It was incredible. Hmm.
Yeah, no, absolutely that. And I think that's why it's so important that when we have these experiences, when we talk about like the type of dream that you had, it's so important that we keep an open mind to that. And at the same time, to reassure people, those types of dreams, they are wisdom in themselves. So,
Hmm.
for example, you could take from that the strength that you had to tell him where to go and what to do,
Hmm.
and those kinds of things. And I think this is one of the things, because what I would never want is for someone to be so scared to go to sleep in
I
case,
know.
you know what I mean? I wouldn't ever want anyone to be worried about that. I talk about this in Answers in the Dark. We're far more frightened of the dark than we need to be. There are things that have happened where we might need to process that with the help of a counsellor or a specialist. But for the most part, we are far more scared of the dark than we need to be. And that comes to our shadow side as well. He
Yes.
talks about shadow side. Charlie Morley talks about this in his books
Hmm.
as well. And I think that's the other thing, is that we're far more scared of those things than we really need to be. Whereas if we can just embrace them, I would never want anyone to be scared to go to sleep in case, they came across, a demon or something like that.
Hmm.
Chances are they will respond exactly the way you did, and
Hmm.
tell them where to go, so they
Hmm.
should. And actually, Charlie Morley in his TED talk, he talks about that, about confronting a demon in his dream and how he dealt with it.
Hmm.
So I think this is why it's so important, to keep an open mind with these experiences, rather than trying to, again, kind of single it into one place. I say this in Answers in the Dark, is if you only approach dreams from one perspective, if you follow it, and again, that's no shade to Sigmund Freud or Carl Jung
Hmm.
or Alfred Adler or any of them, they all have their place in understanding dreams and what they mean. But if you only ever apply one school of thought, you are only getting one bite of the apple. There's a story I tell in the book about how these guys are trying, they're all blindfolded, and they're trying to figure out what it is that they're touching. They're actually touching an elephant. They don't realize
Oh,
that's what
wow.
they're doing.
Okay.
It's an ancient story. And they're touching an elephant, but they don't realize it's that. And because they're all blindfolded and all of them are at different parts of the animal, so the person holding the trunk, for example, thinks they're holding a drain pipe, and the person at one end thinks that they're holding the leg of a table or something like that. And that's what dreams are like. We can approach them from all these different angles, but unless we take the blindfolds off and look at them as a whole big picture, you're only going to get one perspective. So that's why I think it's so important we keep an open mind.
I have to agree with you because even though I work and mentor with people, I always tell people that if they're able to, it's such an enriching, and I think you learn so much more in the experience when you work with different mentors, because people have different ways of teaching, of looking at things, or like
Mm,
you just gave that analogy with the elephant. And if we're open to it all, and we take the pieces that maybe resonate with us, and then I call it putting it back on my proverbial back shelf. It's up on the back shelf. I may not need it right now, but I know it's important. There may be a piece to it. It's eventually going to come into play, or it may not, but it's there. I've made note of it. And the most important thing, I think, is we need to be honest with ourselves and not afraid of what that message is telling us,
mm,
rather than you meet so many people that think they need, and this is no shade on anybody, they need somebody to tell them what it means. Now there's a role, like you said, for a counselor or somebody that can guide them through maybe processing the experience, but I still truly believe we only know ourselves the best. We really do, and we
yeah.
need to be honest with ourselves, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I think this is one of the reasons why we have recurring dreams, is if we're not, if we're not taking the time to understand. I'll give you an example. One of the examples I give in Answers in the Dark is a woman. She kept having this recurring dream, and it was, I won't go into detail, but it was gory. It was quite a graphic dream to some extent. So there was, there was blood and stuff like this in the dream. And I remember her telling me that it was all over this phone. So there was, in her dream, this phone was ringing, but she couldn't get to the phone because it was just all this stuff around it, and it was disgusting. And she just couldn't get near the phone. She couldn't pick up the phone. And so and she kept having this as a recurring dream, and it was distressing because it was, to her, it was gory, it was graphic, those kinds of things. And all I said to her was something along the lines of, is there someone you need to speak to, but you're finding it difficult right now? You're finding it difficult to pick up the phone to talk to someone. And she said, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm just finding it really difficult to speak to this member of her family. And I said, it may be that your dream is kind of a representation of that fear. And, I don't want to do this, or I'm scared to do this. I'm scared what it would look like. And when we had that conversation, she never had that dream again. And so that's an example of how sometimes even nightmares have their own wisdom. Even nightmares can be as violent, as graphic, as gory as they could be. So I saw someone comment earlier about being stabbed in a dream. And, those kinds of dreams can often point us towards being hurt, so it's not the action that's happening in the dream, like the being stabbed, that's the problem, if you like. It's what that means, which is being hurt. And, so it might be worth, exploring our relationship with pain, physical or emotional. What's our relationship with pain like? But those are the things, when I talk to people about their dreams, it is an exploration. It's more an acknowledgement, and in some cases, like your dream, it's absolute reverence, because, there's something quite profound about that type of dream. But at the same time, it's very much about allowing the individual to explore and create that wisdom and understand that their dream is trying to tell them something. They just need to get to the bottom of what.
Yeah, because it's almost like with this poor lady, because it was so graphic and it just kept happening over and over. I think all of us intuitively know it's got to mean something because it keeps happening. And you, with facilitating the way you did, by asking, is it maybe there's somebody, maybe you're trying, I love the way you said it. I'm not going to do it justice, but basically you're avoiding having a conversation with someone, and it was like the light bulb went on, right?
Exactly.
That's what it was.
Yeah. And another example was, there was a person, she told me that she was having this dream, and in the dream she was putting her hand in a fish tank, and she was trying to get this fish. And every time it was taking her ages in the dream. She was getting really frustrated, and she was putting her hand in, and she'd get the fish to the top of the water. And as she got the fish to the top of the water, thinking, oh, I've got it, it would slip out of her hand like a bar of soap and go back into the water. And again, I don't know if you have these analogies in Canada, but so in the UK, when we describe someone as a bit of a slippery fish, it means, that we can't pin them down. It means we can't get a decision out of them and stuff like that. So that's what I said to her. I just said, I'm wondering if there's someone in your life at the moment who's a bit of a slippery fish, isn't perhaps giving you an answer, isn't perhaps telling you what you want to know. She had got so focused on the dream being about a fish, and the fact that she was frustrated and she couldn't get what she wanted. She wasn't looking at the metaphor or the analogy of it. And so I said to her, I'm wondering if there's someone who's a bit of a slippery fish around you. And she started laughing, and she said, it's my boyfriend. I keep wondering if he's going to ask me to marry him. She said, but she hadn't made that connection. So I think that's the thing. It is sometimes it is about being able to think in metaphor as well. So when we start thinking about the language that we're using in dreams, is that a metaphor for something rather than
That's what I meant. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I had to throw this in there because it supports what you're saying. That's what I meant about the subconscious is, and it doesn't necessarily have to come. We don't have all the answers about dreams, but when we look at the wording, and I'm so glad you brought this up. There really is, like, when I try and teach people, we all have intuition, and you'll find people, no, you don't. You're only special people have this. No, they don't. We use the term over here. I'm going to trust my gut. I'm going to follow it in my gut. Or I've got this, you'll hear people say, I've got this monkey on my back, or watch when someone stabs you in the back, or all these types of sayings. They actually have literal meaning. And a lot of times our dreams will show that, won't they?
Absolutely that. And that's why I say in the book, in Answers in the Dark, I say about look at the language that you're using in the dream. Think about metaphors. Is your dream literal? Is there something? So another example was a lady who told me she just had a baby, and in her dream, her mum had taken her new baby and had swaddled this baby really, really tightly in sort of blankets, and then put the baby in front of a fire. In the dream, this was. And I remember saying to her, would that dream be literal, or is it a metaphor for something? And she said, no, it's literal. She said, every time my baby comes back from my mum's, my baby is wrapped so tightly that she's too hot. Baby is too hot. And she said, I just need to have a word with my mum and tell her to stop, wrapping the baby so tight and the baby being too hot. So for her, that dream was literal. There was no other symbolic reference to it.
And a reminder that probably when we're so busy with a newborn, that the next time my mom looks after the baby, I need to remind her, don't wrap the baby up.
Don't wrap the baby so tight.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I think sometimes, but again, like I was saying earlier, they can be symbolic, they can speak to us in metaphor, or they could be creative. They could be giving us.
You're reading my mind. I was just going to ask you that. About the creative. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I hope you can, because that's what I was going to ask you about. So, because that's part of what the description was about the book. So how can people use their dreams when it comes to creativity, and use them, if you will, to your advantage, to the positive, with using the information and messages that we're receiving?
I think for me, this is where, first of all, keeping a dream diary is so helpful, because you'll start to see patterns in your dreaming, even if they're not giving you anything that feels like, particularly great insight or wisdom. You'll certainly be able to make sense of some of their content. And even if you then kind of keep it for a later date to understand and explore, keeping a dream diary can be so helpful. Another way, though, is that certainly in the experiences of people that have used their dreams creatively. So I mentioned Keith Richards, who dreamt the riff to I Can't Get No Satisfaction, so he says, or so I've heard. So
Stephanie Meyer, okay, so I got to ask you, because I haven't heard this. Did she dream the whole series in one dream?
Oh, yeah, apparently so. So she says on her website, she dreamt the story from start. Even I believe, even the ring that and the trees, so the location, she dreamt it. And it was only after the dream that she actually went on the internet and Googled, where could these
Forks
be? Forks in just outside Washington. So I think for those things, Stephanie Meyer, Paul McCartney, he apparently dreamt the tune to Yesterday. Albert Einstein apparently dreamt the theory of relativity. I mean, throughout history, there have been people who woke up in the morning, and instead of looking at that, why did I dream about that? They dreamt, their book or their song or something like that. So a famous example is the story of Mary Shelley. She was at a party with other famous writers at the time, so Byron and Keats, and so I understand it, those kind of people. And they were talking about ghosts and goblins and demons and things like that. And she apparently said to them, we're all going to have nightmares tonight, because they'd been talking about these, these esoteric experiences. And she said to them, whoever remembers their dream in the morning has to write a story about it, because we're going to have nightmares. And sure enough, she remembered her nightmare, and that is literally how Frankenstein was born. So Frankenstein was the nightmare that Mary Shelley had that night.
Wow.
it. And that is literally how Frankenstein was born. So I think this is where we can, if we want to, we can use our dreams as this incredible resource, whether it's telling us about problems that are happening in the here and now, or whether it's giving us something creatively. If we start with the dream diary, then we're in a better position, to do something with it. Another common dream that people often ask me about, and in my experience, it is mostly women. It's very rare that a man will contact me about this particular dream. But one of the most common dreams that women will contact me about is that they will dream that their partner is cheating.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll say to me, I've given him such a hard time today
I
because
know. I can't believe they do this, because I know so many people like literally screaming and yelling at them. It's like, I didn't do anything.
no, but it's because in their dream he cheated on her. And they'll contact me because they are worried that it's happening. So they're contacting me because they're worried that this is that intuition, that it is a level of awareness. And one of the things I say to people is just talk about it. Talk to them about it. Tell them about the dream that you've had. If you have the kind of relationship that you can say to somebody, I dreamt you cheated on me last night. If you've got that relationship with someone where you can actually say that to them, then you will know intuitively how that conversation is going to go. But I also say to people to think about it as nighttime therapy. So could it be that your dream is raising your awareness to perhaps a level of insecurity, especially if a previous relationship ended badly because one or other cheated, then it's quite possible that they've had that dream because they don't want that to happen again. So it's a fear of it happening rather than it happening, if you see what I mean. And so that's why I think it's so important that people think about how their fears show up in their dreams as well, not just, the other stuff that we've been talking about.
I like what you're saying there, because I will get people come for a reading that will ask me if their spouse is cheating or their partner. The one thing I always tell people is I can't, and I tell them right when they book the reading, I can't go into other people's energy. Can I? Yes. Will I? No, because that's like me walking into somebody's house that they're not home, breaking in and helping myself. But when somebody will ask me about a relationship and they think their partner is cheating, we talk about many different perspectives, including having this conversation. But I also say there has to be a reason why you are coming to me with this question. And again, we talk about, is it insecurity? What has led you to think this? And I think it's so important because that comes from somewhere. And you're right, it's just going to keep repeating, because that is a big fear, obviously, with women that comes up, that it's got to be processed somehow, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the chances are, if they get to the bottom of it, then it won't happen again. They
Exactly.
won't have that dream again. So it makes sense for them to understand it, and consider the that kind of thing. They can think about that, about what the reality of that is. But I do think as well, and this is where again the fear element in dreams shows up in so many different ways. I have women who will have dreamt that their child has died, which is the most awful, devastating dream. But it's a dream. It's not the reality. It's a dream that they're having. And one of the things that I will ask is, how old is your child? And usually they will say to me at the time of the dream that they're somewhere around a teenager, the teenage years, or they're at those early stages of development where the mum is starting to see a subtle shift in the way they don't need their mum anymore. And so it's not that the child is going to die. It's the recognizing the death of their relationship, that their relationship with that child is changing. And so, but that can sometimes manifest as death in dreams, because, and one of the things I talk about in Answers in the Dark is that death rarely means death in dreams.
It usually means change is coming, or change of some kind.
Yeah, it usually means change. And I think this is where, if we can reassure people that actually, for the most part, death in dreams is rarely about death. It's often about change, or it's the fear of death, it's the fear that it might happen. So that will show up, unless of course that their loved one is dying. If I talk about this in Answers in the Dark as well. If their loved one is dying, it makes sense that they're going to have a dream like that, about dreams of death. But again, so often our fears show up in our dreams. And yet if we take a step back and kind of take that element away and think, okay, but what's actually happening between me and my child right now? Am I feeling a disconnect between me and my child at the moment? If that's the case, then that may well show up as a death in the dream. It's just that because the dream is, if you like, representing the change in that relationship status, the way that disconnect is showing up somehow.
And that makes sense. But the one I always laugh at, and I still hear it from, I don't laugh at people, but the point of this is, and I'm sure you've probably, maybe you haven't heard it, but I can't tell you how many people have said to me, well, you realize that if you fall off a building in a dream and you land, you die. Okay, so if you look at this logically, okay, so if I actually land and I hit the pavement and I die, how do you know I've died from a dream? Like seriously, like, have you heard this one before? Like, I don't know where people would get that from.
I literally talk about that, yeah, and it's so. I reply exactly the same way. I'll say, well, if you died in the dream, how would you know?
How would you know? Like somebody would just say it's tragic. They passed in their sleep, but they'd never know you had that dream.
The good news is, in all the years I've been doing this, there's two elements to it. The first is that I have met people who have fallen and hit the bottom in a dream.
I have.
So that's the good news. The good news is, if you hit the bottom in a dream, you live to tell the tale, because that happens. But the other thing is that it's, I think, again, it shows, and I talk about this in Answers in the Dark, it shows how scared we are of talking about death. It shows
absolutely.
how scared we are of talking about dying, to the point where we would be worried that if we had that dream that we would die, rather than actually having a conversation about being afraid of death, we're talking about being afraid of a dream about death. And so I think this is one of the reasons I talk about this in Answers in the Dark, is I think that, and certainly in Western culture, I think not so much in Eastern cultures, again, these conversations are part and parcel of living, death is life. But certainly I think certainly in the UK, we have a real difficulty talking about death and dying. It's almost taboo. Well, it's taboo. It's it's scary stuff. And so I think this is one of the reasons why we can start to have these conversations about the fear of death. Because the thing is, if we don't have the conversations during the day, they are going to show up in your dreams at night. If you're afraid of death during the day, it's going to show up in some way, shape or form in your dreams at night.
I couldn't agree with you more. And there was a series a couple of years ago that was coming out of the UK, actually, a lot from Ireland, but also England, Scotland. And they started it off with how it used to be with an Irish wake, where death was normalized. The body was brought into the family home. The children were there playing. Everybody was celebrating the life, right? But I loved also what they talked about, because I think it's so important with grief. And the way they described it was this squiggling big ball, moving ball of black little, no, they weren't worms, but they were energetic little lines, if you will. And what I love the analogy that they use, that ball will always be there, but as life goes on and time goes on, a new normal starts to grow about it. But the big thing about it was normalizing that we are all going to die. I mean, you just can't say that to most people, because that would just be one of the most horrific things you could say, but it's the truth. It really is. And I don't know how to change it. Go ahead.
I think even in, so I follow a Buddhist way of life. So, you could say that I've got a good deal because there's a chance I'm going to come back again, and so that's okay.
I believe in it. I believe we are everlasting souls.
Yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, it kind of makes the point about, the one life philosophy. If I've only got one life, then I should live it, and I should experience it and stuff like that. But I do think that we've kind of, again, we don't have those conversations. We haven't normalized it. You know, we do everything to try and make sure it doesn't happen. And don't get me wrong, I don't mean that we shouldn't take care of ourselves, you know, that
Oh,
we
of
should
course.
completely, you know, we should look after ourselves. We should make sure that we're doing all that we can to stay well. But as you said, you know, ultimately it is going to happen. And yet I think we can create these fears, these anxieties, these frustrations, and live our life around them. You know, we can live our lives being so afraid of living, you know, that, or be certainly so afraid of dying, that we don't actually live our lives. You know, we've got so consumed by it. One of the things I joke about with my family is that I have what's called an end of life directive. So
Okay, I know that.
so hopefully my, you know, my end of life is a very long way away, but I have an end of life directive, so my children know, you know, what I want to happen with my body. They know what song I want at my funeral, which is Rick Astley. Apart from anything else, Rick Astley has to play at my funeral.
Oh, I love it.
And like that. But the way I've done this is that, you know, and again, I've obviously reassured my children that this is a very, and my children are adults, by the way, you know, this isn't something I was talking to them from a, you know, that very young age, but again, we've had these conversations where we've normalized the fact that there is going to come a point, at some point, hopefully not for a very long time, but there is going to come a point where I'm not here anymore. And they have to find ways to navigate that. You know, they're going to have to find ways to navigate that. And so talk to me while they're, you know, while I'm here, you know, talk to me about it while I'm here. Are there things they want to know? You know, are there things they want to ask? Is there anything they're not sure about? Rather than them having to worry about that when I'm not here, you know, rather than them feeling like they wish they had done that. Because otherwise, I've seen it so many times in my career where people have died and the families have just fallen apart because they didn't even know what reading they wanted at the funeral, or they didn't know what hymn they wanted at the funeral, or they didn't know what music they would have liked, or they didn't know what flowers they would have liked, or anything like that, because they didn't have those conversations. They didn't ask those questions. And that, I think, for the people left behind is so hard. It's so difficult. And so, yeah, I think, you know, again, we do it in a way, and this is one of the things I talk about in Answers in the Dark. I do it in a light-hearted way. You know, we're making the point it's not going to happen for a very long time, but it's still important that we have these conversations.
Yeah, I was smiling while you were talking that way because, well, I have my youngest, he's 24, he has severe autism. So if mom has a hangnail, he's worried I'm going to die. And he doesn't have the communication skills to be able to explain that. But especially with my eldest, yes, death was a part of living. And no, I wasn't giving him nightmares and everything. Maybe because he grew up, like I said, in this crazy haunted house too. You know, we had to have conversations about what's going on or we think is going on. So they think the reason why I think he got it was he's 27 now and he got a tattoo and he said, Mom, if life goes the way we think it will, you're not always going to be here, but I want to have you looking over my shoulder. So he said, could you write me a special note and I'm going to have it tattooed on my shoulder? And he did.
That's so lovely.
And same as with my partner. I know exactly where he wants to be buried, how he what he wants done. Exactly, he knows too. But I think when we work with this stuff and we're around it, I think we see. And I wish the whole world could kind of have these conversations because I think the world, it would sort of help heal a lot of things in the world, don't you?
Yeah, I do. And I think this is one of the reasons why, you know, we tend to, for the most part, I think people tend to avoid the conversations because it might feel morbid, or, you know, they don't want to jinx it, or, you know, those kinds of things. But at the same time, it, like, as you said, it's going to happen anyway, whether you talk about it or not, it's going to happen anyway. So isn't it better to talk about it, even if it's not going to be for another 50 years? Isn't it better to talk about it so that when the time eventually comes, you can have that? And this is one of the things I was talking about this recently. As I say, my dad died when I was a teenager. And because of the circumstances at the time, I was left, as a teenager, I was left with making the big decisions.
Oh my goodness. What a bunch of, oh my goodness.
I was left with decisions like, should we, I don't know what it's called in Canada, but we have a DNR, so do not resuscitate.
Yeah, DNR. Yeah, DNR.
And And so I had to make those decisions as a
Oh
teenager.
my goodness, that's that
Whether my kid or not.
responsibility.
And yeah, and it's one of the reasons why I talk about it now, is to say that if we're not having those, and the reason I was left so just completely at that age, as you can imagine, just what do I do,
Can't even
was because
imagine.
we hadn't had those conversations. You know, if we'd had those conversations, I would have had some insight. I didn't know what hymns he wanted at his funeral. I had no idea. But it's just, again, it was just one of those things that you look back on and you think, I don't want anyone else to go
To
through
go
that.
through that, yeah. Well, especially when you said how young you were to have to make those decisions. My goodness, I can't even imagine. I can't even
Mm,
imagine. Those are things that you don't think about at that young age, let alone having
no.
to do that for your father. So my heart
Mm,
goes out to you. And, we always have a choice when we've been placed in extremely, painful, difficult situations like yourself. And what a beautiful thing that you've chosen to take that experience and, like you said, not want anybody else to experience what you have. And I think
mm.
that's so important.
Yeah, and I think this is why I think I ended up doing the work that I do
Hmm.
now. As I said, if my dad hadn't died when he did, I
Hmm.
think I probably would have just found, I think I still would have gone into a helping role, but
Hmm.
I don't think it would have necessarily been the shape that it's taken, today. And I think for me, that's what's really influenced my work, combined with, having these conversations around the breakfast table and talking to my mum about dreams and things like that. I think it's just been really interesting when I look back. And I talk about this in the acknowledgements in Answers in the Dark. Actually, I talk about how it's not just the people that have been in my life that have influenced my ability to write the book, but it was
Right.
how they showed up. It was when they showed up. And the circumstances that we met, and how those kind of things, everything happened at the right time. Everything happened in the way that it was meant to. So yeah, it's just been able to influence my work and doing what I do now.
I never knew about Keith Richards with the riff or Stephanie Meyer. Like I said, I read all those books. I've seen the movies. I've done the whole thing. I never, ever once knew that. But there is I don't usually go to Gavin's questions, but he had some, I think you probably gave them to impossible talking points. But I think this is a huge one. There's two of them here. One of them is how big of a problem is insomnia?
So in the UK and in the US, I'm not sure what the statistics are for Canada, but
Probably
certainly
just the same.
as bad. Yeah. But certainly in the UK, we are a sleepless society, and
Mhm.
I know that a third of Americans have problems sleeping, and it's a little bit more. It's actually nearer 40% in the UK have problems sleeping on a regular basis.
Mhm.
But when we think about insomnia, we're talking about trouble falling asleep or staying asleep,
Yeah,
and that was how we would kind of loosely define it. The World Health Organization that says globally that insomnia is affecting about 20% of the global population.
that's a
So one
lot.
one in five people globally is having problems sleeping. And there's lots of different reasons for that. So for some people, it will be their lifestyle. For some people, it will be, they drink too much coffee, those kinds of things. But one of the things I talk about in Answers in the Dark is that sometimes it's not what we're doing during the day that stops us sleeping, it's what's happening to us during the day. And that's how I define situational insomnia. So for example, we often talk about when people have trouble sleeping, we'll say, oh, how much coffee are you drinking, are you exercising too close to bedtime, have you got a bedtime routine? And all of those things matter, don't get me wrong, all of those things are important, but it's what's happening to us during the day that will influence how well we sleep and how well we dream at night. So anything that we're not dealing with during the day is going to show up at night, especially in the stillness of night when it's dark and it's quiet. If I call it the roadrunner effect, where you've been going at 100 miles an hour all day,
Hmm.
and you get into bed, your head hits the pillow, and your bed reminds you, your bedroom just becomes this magical place that reminds you of all the things you haven't done today. It reminds
Hmm.
you about an argument you had 20 years ago and all the things you said.
Yeah.
And so this is where I talk about it, about how insomnia is showing up for people. But I think, again, we've fallen into the trap of thinking, oh, I just need to cut down on coffee, or I just need to use lavender in my bath, or I just need to listen to calming music. Those things help, don't get me wrong, but for a lot of people, they will be doing all the right things and they still can't sleep. And that's because of the situational insomnia. It's because of, there will be things that have happened to them or are happening to them, and because they're just not navigating them during the day, it's almost like it's a hole that they're walking around during the day, but they're falling into the hole at night. And this is what stops us sleeping. And of course, the more stressed we are when we go to bed, the more likely we are to stay awake. There is no way our brain is going to authorize sleep if we're stressed. So I think this is one of the reasons why it's such a massive problem. It's not just our mobile phones, although that's one reason, looking at a mobile phone too late into the evening can be a problem. But it's not just that. For a lot of people, it will be what's happening or has happened to them.
So do you offer solutions in the books? And again, there's never any guarantee because everybody's unique, but things that you have found that work. Because the one thing I have suggested that sometimes will work, if your brain won't shut off and you think about all the things you haven't done, why not just write it down? Because I know if I think about it, I'm going to think I'm going to forget about it. 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 So just get it out on paper. It's right there. You know, you're going to see it in the morning. Or the other one, when I go on a lot less sleep now than I ever used to. I'm a chronic pain sufferer. So I sleep when I can and that's it. Right. And I'm okay with that because I try to listen to my body. If you can't sleep, you can't sleep. But I remember like when, say, you had a big test the next day and you wake up at 3 a.m. and you keep watching the clock going, I got to get to sleep. I got to get to sleep. I got to get to sleep. And it becomes worse and worse. So do you offer some potential solutions?
Yeah, so the book itself is actually split into 3 parts.
Oh, love it.
Has kind of these 3 sections to it. The first part of the book explores what I call the big myths of sleep. So one of the big myths of sleep is that everybody needs 8 hours every night. It's one of the biggest myths. We're all different. Some people need 6, some people need 10. But because we've got into this myth, this belief that we all need 8 hours, like you said, what happens is people wake up in the middle of the night, they look at the clock and they think, oh, I'm not going to get my 8 hours.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that then leads to feelings of stress. The brain won't then authorize sleep and it just becomes this vicious cycle. So the first part of the book unpacks these myths, the idea that, we all need 8 hours sleep, for example. That's one of the myths that I unpack. Then the second part of the book, I actually offer what I call a sleep cycle repair kit.
I like it.
Within that, there are different tips and techniques that people can try. So for example, it may well be that you would write down, if you've got something that you just know, rather than putting it into your phone, you might have pad and pen by your bed and you can just make a note that way. Because you're right, your brain's not going to let it go. If you're so worried you'll forget, then your brain's not going to let it go. So it's helpful to write it down. But it contains other things as well. So one of the things that I talk about in the book is using mindfulness and mindfulness meditation. But one of the things, again, like you were saying, I caution people and say is that it's not for everybody. Not everybody finds it useful.
True.
But the techniques that I've taught in the book have been proven to help people get a better night's sleep. So one of the things that I recommend is what I call taking yourself off on a virtual holiday. So when you're laying in bed at night, imagining a beautiful holiday destination and creating that image in your mind of where you would like to go. And because it's in your imagination, you can go wherever you want. You can take yourself off. I had one person say to me that they actually went to Mars.
How did I know you were going to say that?
They didn't even want to stay on this planet because it's just too scary right now. But that's the great thing about the imagination, is that you can go wherever you want to go. So that's one of the things, is I talk about this virtual holiday. But also I talk about things like the golden hour, which is the time before bed. Because again, I think, and I do a lot of work with first responders. So I do a lot of work with police officers and paramedics. And one of the things they tell me they've fallen into the habit of doing is the night before they're due to go back on shift. So if they do 4 on 4 off, for example, the night before they're due to go back on shift, they will check their work email. And they tell me it's because I just want to get ahead, I just want to get ahead of whatever.
No.
I say, does it ever work? Does it ever work? Do you ever feel like, yeah, right, that's it, I'm on top of everything? And they say, no, every single time it's just terrible. It's just a bad idea. So that's one of the things. And that's actually known. So that kind of back to work feeling that you get the night before you go back to work, most people will identify. It's almost like a sense
Dread. Dread.
Yeah. And it's called Sunday night syndrome. It's basically where people will just get that feeling of, oh, back to work tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so their brain just starts going in this direction. And to make themselves feel better, they check their work email, because they think, oh, if I just check my email, I'm going to feel better and I'll be able to relax. But the reality, of course, that never happens. So we have to find other ways to kind of calm, relax the mind and check the email.
For sure. Definitely. You are so right about that, because I've been trying to really do this, is take the weekends off from social media. No, I'm not an addict. I'm not on it all day long. But it tends that, you know what, I like weekends, especially for relaxing and just getting away from things and getting back to things that I have my mind on something else, versus talking to people all day long, like you said, emails and whatever else. And then every time, you are so right, that I just get this little temptation. I should check that. I know I was going to get an email. It's on the weekend. I'm on there for hours, because it just leads to more and more and more and more. And you deal with it now, or otherwise you're awake at night worrying about it, right?
Yeah, exactly that. And it doesn't work. I mean, this is the thing. I think one of the things that the pieces of research that I talk about in Answers in the Dark is that, something like 6 out of 10 British people will check their email when they're on holiday. And I'm sure that's the case, again, I'm sure that's the case around.
Yes.
Certainly in cultures that rely on technology and things like that. I think we've fallen into this trap of being available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And of course, our bodies just aren't designed like that. One of the things I talk about in Answers in the Dark is how we've kind of, if you've noticed, we've tried to separate the 24 hours a day that we have. We've tried to separate it very neatly into 3 blocks of 8. So we've got 8 hours for work, we've got 8 hours play, and then we've tried to create 8 hours for sleep. And of course, that our bodies just don't work like that. We're still very much kind of living on agricultural time. The idea before all this technology, our brains haven't upgraded. And so we just have to, very much like you were saying earlier, we have to kind of go with the body. We have to listen to the body and what it's trying to say.
Yeah, but you know what? That, because I also do medical intuition, and I will tell people, again, whether you say it's your subconscious or the body or what trying to talk to you, it's literal, especially when it really helped with the nursing background of asking people to describe what the pain feels like. And I listen to the words that they're using, right? But I always say to people that pain, for example, is your body's language of saying, hey, pay attention. This needs attention here. And it doesn't necessarily mean something's wrong, because I believe we're incredible creatures. We can store memory in spots that even need, there's all kinds of things. You can get into a whole different discussion. And our brains are so complex. You can see why there's so much to unpack with dreams. Like, this is a really incredible book. So I think you got to the second part. So what's the third part of your book?
So the third part of the book is where I unpack dreams, and I look at different types of dreams that people have, and the kind of experiences we've talked about already. So I talk about predictive dreaming, I talk about visitation dreams, and how I differentiate those from what I call this nighttime therapy. And then I offer different types of the dreams that people might experience when they're feeling anxious, especially with the kind of fears around death that I was talking about earlier as well. So I think it kind of covers a range of different areas. But one of the things I'm careful to say is it's not a dream dictionary, for all the reasons we've talked about, really, because everybody.
But not even close. Not even close.
It's just not. It's not that kind of book. It's more about helping people explore, but thinking about different types of themes that people might dream about. And also it offers this little toolkit it so that people can start to think about how they might explore their own dreams. So keeping a dream diary is obviously key to that, and helping them start that process. But like you said earlier, even if a person isn't maybe remembering their dreams at the moment, one of the things that I say is we're not meant to remember every single dream that we have. You know, I read some research once that said if you remembered every dream that you ever had, your head would be so big you'd need a shopping cart to carry it around, right? So we know we're not meant to remember every dream we have, but we can start that process just by considering how important they can be. If you've grown up in an environment where, you know, every time you had a dream as a child, if somebody turned around to you and said, oh, don't worry, dreams don't mean anything, as an adult, you're not going to place the same level of importance on them as you or I might, because we grew up in an environment where they were embraced, they were talked about, or certainly in my case, you know, where they were embraced and talked about. So I think, again, just if we can kind of encourage people to remember that their dreams are offering them some wisdom, that they can use them as a valuable resource, and you never know, you know, they might find something valuable that they can do something with or not. One of the things I say in the book is dreams are like friends. If you if you listen to them, if you pay attention to them, they will give you, because look, friends can often see things that we can't. You know, our friends will be able to they're on the outside looking in, so they can see things that we can't. And dreams are just like that. They can see things that are under the surface that we're perhaps not necessarily seeing. But if you've got friends, if you ignore them for long enough, they will leave you alone. And dreams are like that as well. You know, if you don't pay attention, you're not going to remember them. So so this is why I say, you know, if you place importance on them, if we recognize that they have something to offer, after a while we will start to remember them, and we can do something with them.
All I kept thinking when you were talking about how you described your book versus that's why I kept saying it's not even close to a dream dictionary, was how empowering your book is, because of what it offers to people. It sounds like you're sharing your wisdom, you're sharing some tools, but you are empowering people to pick up from there, and they're going to still have to do the work. But again, how many times have we said this? But I believe it's so true, and I'm feeling you're saying the same thing, that we know ourselves best. So and I loved what you said too about friends can see from the outside looking in. I must say that all the time. It's so easy to be looking from the outside looking in versus ourselves, because we basically could be holding the mirror up to our face. We can't see it, but others can.
Yeah, exactly that. And that's the irony of it, is that our dreams are doing that. You know, our dreams are saying, right, you're worrying about this, or you've got this particular fear, or you're feeling insecure about that, or you're worried this is going to happen. But because when we wake up in the morning, we perhaps don't give them the time or attention that they need, we don't necessarily give them any you know, particular you know, kind of insight or time and attention, we don't necessarily get that wisdom from them. But if we can take a step back, even if you, when you wake up in the morning, even if you just write the dream down and come back to it later, you know, you might remember it a bit more later, if you've written it down, you know, if you've written down the context of it. But I think this is why, you know, again, that point about the dream diary is so helpful, because I've looked back on my dream diary and I've seen things, like I said earlier, I've seen things in my diary where I've thought, oh, I know exactly now why
that meant. Yeah,
I know now what that meant. And so that's what I mean. It's not just the wisdom that you get in that moment, it's the wisdom that you can glean from, you know, days, weeks, months of keeping a record, because what we're not dealing with during the day will show up at night in different ways. We just have to try and embrace and enhance that, and find ways to use that. But you're right, it's very much about, we know ourselves best. I say it in that it's very much like having your own decoding device. You have your own decoding device. It's like an Enigma machine. You have your own decoding device. You just need to take the time and do the work, like you said, to do the work. It might be that, you know, there are people that can help you with that. You know, there might be a friend or a counsellor that can give you that wisdom and insight. But ultimately, only you can decide, yeah, that's what my dream means.
Yes, because I'll tell you, and when I asked you if Stephanie Meyer dreamt her whole book, I was incredulous of it, but not really, because my partner Del has his own show here on the network on Thursday nights. It's called The Delicious Recipe, but it's not a cooking show. I have to tell you some of the dreams, and he tells me, I guess it's normal in our house. He'll tell me his dreams, and he'll still be going on for 20 minutes. And it is fascinating with details and what happens. And he can wake up to, I'm sure you've found people like this. He
Mm.
can wake up and have a conversation and decide he's going to go back to that dream and finish that dream. I don't know how he does it. Is
Yeah.
that common, or is it?
Yeah, so it's very much to do with the way, and certainly when you wake up during your sleep cycle. So if you wake up in the middle of your REM sleep cycle, it's quite possible that you can go back into it and carry on the dream where you left off. When we fall back to sleep, we don't start the sleep cycle again. We just carry on where we left off.
Right.
So if you're in the middle of REM sleep, which is when we're dreaming mostly, then yeah, you should be able to go straight back into the dream, which is great if you're having a lovely dream.
Yes.
It's not so great if you're
With
having
a nightmare.
Yeah, if you're having a nightmare, that can be a nightmare in itself. But certainly, yeah, people that, and I've met people like that who, whenever I go on the TV and on the radio and stuff, and the presenters will say to me, "Is it okay if we get a few people on air to tell us about their dreams?" I always say to them, they'll need to say it in a few words, because if it takes them 20 minutes to tell me their dream, it's going to take me at least that to then unpack and explore it with them, because I'd need to go through every point that they make and talk about
I hear you.
That picked up. So yeah, I think this is why. But again, people that have that level of dreams, like you were saying about your partner, those level of dreams, those are stories in the making. Those are the types of dreams that you can turn into books, into those wonderful pieces of wisdom. So yeah, it's just really good to be able to keep a note of them.
Thanks, Debbie, for popping in. We've got about 10-15 minutes left. Thanks for popping in. I'm glad you were here. Even my oldest son, like I said, I guess it's not odd for him because the way you were raised, both my children, but like I said, for my youngest too, it's the norm, I guess. But my eldest now lives on his own, his partner and the whole bit. They've got a house, but he'll still tell me some of his dreams, and it's just like, oh my gosh. First thing I'll say is, what did you eat before bed?
It's so true. It's so true.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, again, those are the kinds of questions that we can ask, when we've had a particularly vivid, or especially a particularly, a dream that's really got our attention. We can start. So what the dream I had last night, for example, one of the dreams that I had last night, I was literally thinking about the person that appeared in my dream before I went to bed. So when I woke up this morning, I just knew that, that I was like, okay, well, that makes sense, because I was literally thinking about that person before I went to bed last night. So, and in my dream, we were just doing what we always did, which was work together. So, that was kind of a reference to that. But there will be dreams which kind of leave you puzzled, and which will, I dreamt once that I was pushing Vin Diesel in a shopping trolley, and that's why I talk about it, because I mention it in Answers in the Dark, because it's those types of dreams that they get your attention.
I'll say
this is the really interesting thing, and I say this, how sometimes people say, when a person appears in your dream, so a complete stranger, so you look at them in the dream and you think, I do not know that person, they don't remind me of anyone, there is nothing about this person that's appeared in my dream that I know. When I had that dream about Vin Diesel, the actor, and I was pushing him in a shopping trolley, I remembered thinking, I wonder if he dreamt about me. So
those are questions that go through my mind. So I'm glad you brought that up.
So you kind of think, well, if a random British woman appeared in Vin Diesel's dream one night,
it was you.
It was me, because that it might well explain why I dreamt about him. So, and that's the thing. I actually talk in Answers in the Dark. I talk about mutual dreaming, about how people will have had a dream and they appeared in each other's
and
dream.
both experience it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
Oh,
they'll
I
say
have a
the
dream
next
for you.
day, yeah, they'll say the next day, they'll say, "Oh, I dreamt, I had this dream last night, and you were in it," and the person will go, "Oh my God, I had exactly the same dream. I was there,
Mm-hmm.
doing this," and that's called mutual dreaming, and I talk about that in the book.
Okay, I have one for you. This is something that somebody shared with me recently. I won't give any details. It's not a family member I've talked about, but they were having a particularly vivid dream. They were amongst tons and tons of people, and all they remembered was being pushed up against this fence, and everybody was filthy. They were full of mud. Like it was a very unpleasant dream. They woke up the next morning and combed their hair. There was a clump of dirt in their hair. They had no reason whatsoever in any way, shape, or form. I am getting goosebumps telling you that. Like,
Wow.
how does that happen? Like,
Yeah. So some scientists would say that they slept walked,
they grew it?
yeah, I mean, who knows? Who knows? That's
Yeah.
the amazing thing about them. And again, I mean, there's one example of a TV show that we had here a little while ago where there was it was a sleep lab where these people were having problems sleeping, and so excuse me, they'd taken them off to this sleep lab to try and
Mhm.
understand the nature of their sleep problems. And one of the experiments they did with this particular person was he had a reputation for finding food in the house.
Oh, while
So, he was,
sleepwalking?
yeah, he was
Mhm.
sleepwalking and he would go and find food. So in this particular experiment, what they did was they put him in a room, and it was a secure unit, so he couldn't get in or out, but he was fine, he was happy to be there. And what they did was they taped a chocolate bar to the top of the door frame, but he had no idea it was there. So they'd hidden food basically in this room, because they wanted to test whether or not he could, he would be able to do that. And without fail, as soon as he fell asleep and started sleepwalking, he went straight over to the door frame and ripped off the chocolate bar and started to eat it. And he could have not known, there was absolutely no way he could have known that that chocolate bar was there.
Wow.
He did that while he was sleepwalking. So again, this is one of the reasons I talk about this in Answers in the Dark, is that there's so much we don't know. When
Uh-huh.
about sleep as a science, we've really only been scratching the surface scientifically for about 100 years. Same with dreams.
Mhm.
There's still so much we don't know that I just think we have to keep an open mind. I just
Mhm.
think we need to do more research, more exploration, but keep an open mind to it, rather than saying, oh, it means this or it's because of that. We just need to keep an open mind because we're all so different.
Hmm. Like, to me, my mind's going a mile a minute. Like, to me, that would make me think that he was, if you will, the astral body stepped out and was looking around the room for some food and noticed it up
Yeah,
there and popped back in and away he went. Because how,
yeah,
well, but then again, you know what? That's what a part of when I'm teaching people, I always say we have not been taught how incredibly powerful, amazing beings we are and the things we're capable of. That, again, have we even scratched the surface or barely scratched the surface? And the dream world, wow, like that's like going to a whole different planet once you, like, if we actually put that much energy, I think, in research into it.
absolutely. And that's why I think we need to open this conversation up with other cultures.
Oh
It's not.
yeah, I loved when you said that. We just were talking. I think that's incredible. Please continue.
Yeah, I think this is why it's so important that we're talking to other cultures and traditions about how
Hmm.
they use dreams and how they approach them. Certainly like Aboriginal cultures and Maori
Hmm.
cultures, and certainly some of the Eastern traditions, how they approach dreams and things
Yes.
like that. Because otherwise, we are just, like I said earlier, we're just falling into that westernized trap of saying, oh, it's from a Jungian perspective or it's from a Freudian perspective and those kinds of things, and we're only going to get one bite of the apple. Whereas if we look at other traditions, and certainly in some cultures around the world, they still to this day will consider the process of dreaming as a way to communicate with the dead, as a way to ask questions about health, wealth, and
Mm-hmm.
love and life and things like that. And they've this is just natural to them. They've just kind of grown up with these philosophies that this is what we do. This is how we embrace this whole experience, because why wouldn't you? From their perspective, why wouldn't you? You've got this amazing, fantastic resource. You've potentially got a lifeline between this world and another world. Why wouldn't you use it? Why wouldn't you want to expand
Mm-hmm.
on it and make the most of it? So I think this is why it's just so important we don't fall into that trap of weaponizing it and just think, okay, well, what other things could we look at and explore?
No, I love that. And I meant to comment on that because I always say too, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's legend and lore, whether it's exactly what we're talking about with dreams. When something has existed through generations and generations and generations, and we're still hearing about it today, there
Mm,
has to be some truth in it for it
yeah.
to persist. Otherwise, it would have been left by the wayside, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. And I think this is why we do need to listen to those other cultures. We need to be more culturally competent. We need to be kind
Mm-hmm.
of more culturally intelligent, and looking at other cultures and what they're able to tell us about what they know and what they learn, rather than just always trying to sort of siphon it off into, oh, it's just that part of your brain, or it's just that, subconscious
Mm-mm.
rattling of your mind. I do think of, and in some cultures, dreams are a divine doorway. They are a portal.
Absolutely.
And I just think, until or unless someone comes along and says, yes, we've researched all of that, which they haven't, not to the
No.
extent that I think we need, but
Mhm.
certainly until or unless someone does that and then comes back and says, but we still think this, that, and the other, I just think we need to keep an open mind and keep having these conversations.
Yeah, because all I keep seeing in my mind as we're having this conversation, I love the analogy of everybody with the blindfold with the elephant, because that's
Mm,
literally, like you said, one bite of the apple, or someone always believing that what they were touching with that blindfold on was just like a drain pipe with the elephant trunk or what, right? And I just, even though and I say this a lot too, is even though I come from a big pharma background, I always, and I'm not giving medical advice, this is what I do personally for people listening, is I always explore what natural avenue is out there first,
mm,
because I just believe that kind of the way your book kind of fell into place, there's usually something geographically within your area, as long as I say it's not life threatening, or, I wouldn't want my sons or somebody to suffer, but it's something that can be treated naturopathically or homeopathically. I always give it a try because there's no harm in it.
mm.
And it's kind of the
Yeah.
same thing with the culture. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think this is one of the things I talk about in the book, is that I think there is absolutely a place for medicines and medication and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. I think there is absolutely a place for that. But I also think that we have to recognize that not everybody wants to or is comfortable with those
Mm-hmm.
kinds of avenues. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
even with sleep medicine, for example, they themselves, certain types of medication can have their own side effects, which make,
Mm-hmm.
dreams more vivid or wild, or, those kinds of things, even the natural remedies, like I was saying
Yeah.
earlier. And this is why I think, that if we use our dreams as this resource to kind of understand what they're trying to tell us, then we would have more insight into, what our body's trying to tell us, or, those kinds of things. And I think this is where, for me, this is why sleep is so important. If we're not prioritizing sleep,
Mm-hmm.
then we're going to struggle, and like you were saying earlier, if we have chronic pain, or if we are struggling with a difficulty, then we know what we're capable of. We know what our body can
Yep.
cope with. We know what our limitations are and stuff like that. But I think we've got out of tune of getting in tune with our bodies. We've kind of fallen out of the habit of listening to our bodies and what they're trying to tell us. And maybe if we listened a bit more, we'd be able to pay attention and do other things, as well as whatever else we feel what might help, whether that's medication or not. We
Mm-hmm.
could maybe look at what would help in the long term.
I hope you'll come back on again. I just love talking to you tonight. I really, really did. And I think our listeners and viewers are really, really going to enjoy this. Even for those watching on the replay, all of you that joined in live. YouTube, we've been having some issues with. I know I'm going to see a ton of comments. I know I am on Messenger, on Facebook, Instagram, everywhere else, because we go out to quite a few different countries around the world. So I would love to have you back, but where can people buy your fantastic book, your website? How can they get a hold of you? Anything you've got coming up?
Thank you so much. So yeah, so Answers in the Dark has its own website. So you can go to answersinthedark.com and that gives you a bit more information about the book itself. And people can find me at my website, which is delphiellis.com, or they can go straight to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and any of the other good bookstores and find my book there.
You've got another thing I signed up for today, though. What can you quickly mention it? Because I think that's
Oh,
really helpful. Maybe we
so
can talk about that next time too.
Yeah, Monday Mojo. Monday Mojo is my weekly newsletter. I send it out
I
every
love it.
Monday. Yeah, and people can either go to mondaymojo.co.uk or themondaymojo.com is where it's headed.
Awesome, because I signed up for it today,
Oh,
and you actually showed some great freemiums, as they're called, but some really great resources,
yeah.
and I just love what you're doing. So, like I said, I'd love to have you back on again in the
Oh,
future. Really enjoyed talking to you.
Lorilei. It's been lovely chatting to you.
Oh, well, thank you for being here. Now, I want to thank everybody for listening. If you ever want to get a hold of me, whether you've got a show idea, a guest idea, I'd like to book a healing session with me or reading or mentoring even, you can get a hold of me on facebook.com/The Angel Rock. Remember, I have two groups on Facebook, Paranormal University for all things paranormal, The Angel Rocker Tribe for many of the topics we talked about this evening. Now, next Monday, it's my birthday. So I don't think I have a guest, but I think we're going to hang out and we're going to talk about whatever you all would like to talk about. So we will be back same time, same space. So I hope to see you there. Help me ring in the birthday. Let's have lots of fun together. And I want to thank you again, Delphi. It's a pleasure having you on tonight. And
Happy birthday for Monday.
oh, well, thank you. Thank you. Like I say, I don't always do my show on my birthday. I don't get lucky for it. And I thought, well, yeah, we'll have a little party on mine. Anyways, thank you to everybody. Remember that if you have listened to this, to remember to share with anybody you think may find this helpful. Also, our archives are carried, including this show, anywhere where talk radio or podcasts are carried. You will find shows from UPRN like the Angel Rock. Anyways, I want to wish you all or send you all much love and light. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. We'll see you next Monday. Thanks.